So let's look at a few terminologies that we had to employ to describe the types of systems that we use here at Raktamachat. So first, I'll describe a passive system. A passive system, there's no moving parts. It's very static, if you will. As simple as digging down into the soil, laying in a plastic tarp, for instance, putting in rocks, a filter media, and a soil base, and then that's just conserving water. So if I add water, my water doesn't through flow. So through flow is a phenomenon when we add water into our garden that 90% of the water is said to bypass the root zone and drain into our subsoils. And at the same time that we lose 90% of the water, we also are leaching nutrients from our soils. So we spend a lot of work to make compost to put into our garden, and we then take watering hose and leach it into the subsoil and lose the water. So that's a quite big loss. If we can identify that with Permaponics, we can stop both of those. We don't need to use as much water, which is very simply, if I'm using a hose, I can water 90% less. And at the same time, I'm not going to leach my nutrients, so I can make less compost. So these are going to give me time-saving reasons, and that also is directly proportional to money. So these systems can be simple, easy, portable. Other systems that we have here at Raktamachat could be described as more active systems. This is more about the future of food. How are we going to feed, 7 billion people to 10 billion people in a manner where people can have free time? Some people have described gardening as literally war. To garden is to have war with nature. How do we alleviate that we work with nature rather than against nature? And this is where we're going to look at active systems, helping to use technology or appropriate technology to save time and resources, thus produce economic yields, fresh food, nutritious food. So we'll look at the other systems that we drew from a history of what we might call other water-based systems, and some of the key components of those systems we have taken from or stole like an artist in permaculture. So we've taken those to help design and hopefully just say improve upon the basis of hydro or water culture. So we don't think that Permaponics is different. We just think that it's a little bit more of an improvement and maybe a hybrid of all of the best things associated with these other systems, but mainly none of these other systems employ the use of water. Employ the use of soil. So our major difference is soil, but we do use a lot of other components that they use. So what is hydroculture? Well, hydroculture is the growing of plants in a soilless medium or an aquatic-based environment. Plant nutrients are distributed via water. The word hydro is named from the Greek word meaning water, hence hydroculture equals water culture. So here we can see a very simple system. It employs a timer and a nutrient pump. It's basically spraying a mist of nutrient-laden water onto the plant roots 24 hours a day. Where does the nutrient come from? Typically, as we see here, a bottle of what we would describe as synthetic nutrients are poured in. This would not be considered a system that would be organic, but we would still be able to grow food. So the timer is very interesting. The pump, the usage of pump, the storage of the container, these are all very similar things that we would use in Permaponics, except for we want to try to derive that nutrient source ourselves. So hydroculture is basically water and nutrients, and they're distributed through what's described as capillary action. A very easy way to understand capillary action is if I was to have a plate of water sitting on the table, and I took my shirt and I dipped it in, and we watched the water run up the shirt against gravity. That would be pulled through by a static electrical charge through what is described as capillary action to a certain point. That point that it went up to is very interesting for us because that's going to be where we create with our standpipes the optimal watering capacity for our gardens. So we'll look at that later. So water and nutrients are distributed by some form of pumping mechanism in typically these systems. The roots might be anchored in what's described as clay aggregates. What is a clay aggregate? This is a synthetically produced ball, if you will, from clay compressed so hard that when soaked in water, it doesn't decompress, so it forms almost what you describe as a rock. People will then use these in their systems, but because they don't have the total soil food web, over time, they have problems with algae and soil-borne diseases like fungi, fungal diseases, algae diseases, and pests, for instance, bugs may habitat. So what they'll do is they'll take these pellets out after a certain period of time and dispose of them, throw them in the garbage. And then they'll put in new pellets. So that's another thing from a permaponics perspective. We don't want to really look at producing rubbish. We want to produce soil, and stabilized soil doesn't need to be disposed of, okay? You just work with your soils and you can alleviate their problems by having the total soil food web. They've created a situation that creates the problems by not using soil in the first place. Some other advantages that people describe of hydroculture. Some advantages are described as ease of maintenance, as watering and feeding involves just topping up the reservoir with growing solution. As we've seen, if you're not worried about organic agriculture or the synthetic nature of the ingredients, then this is fine. As a permaculturalist, being into organics, we would not be able to, some may say even ethically, to utilize this growing medium. And whether we could do it, we may not want to eat it. So these are things that we look into. Certain types of hydroculture media are resistant to some types of soil-borne insects. So when you see their media and they market it as insect resistant, meaning that it will get insects in it, and the reason is it doesn't have a soil profile. So you're only providing one part of the soil profile, which is structure. Later we'll see that to have a healthy soil food web, we need more than one part of the structure. So artificial nutrients and only structure equals soil-borne diseases. So what's aquaculture again? Well, it's the breeding, rearing, and harvesting of plants and animals in all types of water environments, including ponds, rivers, lakes, and the ocean. Researchers and aquaculture producers are farming all kinds of fresh and saltwater species of fish, shellfish, and plants. And some of these can very well be described as great systems, small scale. So we can see here on the left side that we have a picture of 4 small blue barrels floating over a pond with 1 small hopper cage and utilizing water-based or the nutrient profile to grow some type of gourd plant. It appears to be snake gourd. And on the right side, though, we have a much more large-scale operation where we have, if not 100 of these in a concentrated format, probably being fed more artificial foods, at which time, in some of these instances, you get a nutrient concentration. So basically, there's so much waste being produced by the fish that it goes down and piles up underneath the cages, okay? So more so, these types of systems are put in river systems because the belief is that as the water is moving, it will disperse that high nutrient load. Sometimes that happens at the place that they're farming, but later down the river, they can have what you might call invasive species of algae blooms, water hyacinth, things like this, because the nutrient level in the water is so high, the plants grow so rapidly through phyto and photoplankton, and that takes all the oxygen, and then downriver, you have a fish kill. Typically, the fish that are dying in that particular situation are the native fish. The wild fish die further down, and the cultivated fish don't at the higher point in the river system. But let's look at a little bit more historical perspective, okay? So although aquaculture today involves tables, pots, pumps, and high-tech lights for indoor gardens, it is nothing new. It is a technique that was used by the ancient Mayans, Aztecs, and the Babylonians. The grow beds for the Aztecs and Mayans were called chinampas, okay? So we can see this currently in Mexico today. You can actually go physically and tour chinampas that have been there for centuries, okay? So what does that mean actually? Well, from a permaponics and a permaculture enthusiast, we like to employ chinampas on a broad scale if we can. And in a more automated or urbanized setting with permaponics, we would call that Permaponics. It's the automated or modified chinampa system. So there's original traditional chinampas, which we can still make today if we have the right conditions. And if we don't, then we can control the water source and make what we could see as a modified chinampa system and or permaponics. So soil-based gardening with water equals permaponics. So what part of aquaculture is used in permaponics? Well, the nutrients in an aquaculture pond or aquarium are an important source of organic nutrients in a natural water-soluble form. So the water solubility of the nutrients is very important. The plants are not able to take up non-water soluble nutrients. So we need to have the soil food web, or the bacteria and microbes that are what some people describe as effective microorganisms, that are able to break down the solids, if you will, into a water soluble form. So what does that mean? The microbe eats the compost. The manure or urine, feces of the microbes is what the plant is actually eating. So the plant is not able to eat it directly. So for instance, here's a lettuce and here's a corn cob. Okay, lettuce, eat corn cob. It doesn't work that way. But if I take the corn cob and I break it into a compost, or what we call as a stable humic material, that stable humic material, right, that is being broken down by the microbes on it, their defecation is what is being eaten. So the output of one system is the input of another system. So the corn cob to the bacteria to the plant to the human to the manure into a field to a corn cob. And it's an input-output relationship. So we want to try to mimic that. So the nutrients in an aquaculture pond or aquarium are an important source of these organic nutrients in this water-soluble form. The types of animal systems in the pond will determine the exact array of nutrients and their concentration. So here again, if we have a very healthy, vibrant, like we have here, stabilized pond system at Raktamachat, we will have a very good nutrient profile, as good as we can get, say, naturally. But if we only have one single fish in an aquarium, they're only going to get the nutrient output of that one single fish and whatever it's being fed. So we feed it the same thing every day, some processed fish food probably, at which time that's the nutrient profile. And if we grew lettuce, that's all that can be in the lettuce. There's no other nutrient profile. There's nothing else present. It's not a web. So we want to look for the soil food web to deliver a balanced, right, and above all, complete nutritional package to our plants. And that's where enthusiasts would see these naturalized systems as being more complete or balanced than the, say, non-naturalized or, say, non-organic. So other things that we can look at, well, basically the nutrient-rich water from an aquaculture-based system typically is the primary water source for a permaponics grow bed. So it's probably better if we can have a naturalized system, but if we don't, for instance, we have in our sala a system that we can see where we have our fish in a fish tank, which is very nice, but we're not able to really stock the fish tank in an ethical manner to have enough nutrient source. So that we'll see that our grow bed, right, that is cleaning the fish tank, the real nutrient source is provided by the soil and the compost going into the soil. So we do derive some nutrients from the water source, but we might only say 10%. 90% of the nutrition is coming from the soil bed, not the fish system, okay? And I think that's the main thing that derives. If they're only using fish and they have no soil-based system, then there must be a nutrient deficiency, okay? And we can see when people are describing hydroponics and different things, they're always typically, especially on the internet, through YouTube, describing the problems they have with their system. They're always having some problem. This doesn't work, that doesn't work. But when we alleviate and add back the soil, almost all of their problems go away. From soil-borne diseases to nutrient deficiencies to my fish don't get enough water cleaned because the soil provides that service. So if we can merge soil-based agriculture with water-based system, water working, hydroculture, water working, with soil equals permaponics. So hydroponics is a system for growing. So we'll switch to hydroponics and look at what it does. So hydroponics is a system for growing plants in a soilless medium, utilizing a pump and a circulation of nutrient-laden water through typically root systems. So here we can see some of the types of structure that they utilize in order to structure the roots. One of these is called perlite, okay? So it's an artificial man-made rock, typically made from something like a gypsum powder, so a rock powder that has been sprayed in to create rock pellets with an air. So it's highly, or as it's described, it has a high surface area, okay? So in this high surface area, they promote this against a standardized rock, and they say that perlite has 50 times the surface area of the same size rock. So the rock would only have the outside surface area, perlite would have it inside. So if anyone's seen a volcanic rock, it's all porous. So all that inside porous nature gives more surface area. So yes, perlite has 50 times more surface area than a standardized rock. But we utilize biochar. And biochar, the molecular structure of the carbon molecule, has the highest surface area of any molecule in the world. So that you could actually probably construe that biochar for the same area is 100 times more surface area than perlite, which is 50 times more than a rock. So in this instance, why would we like to use the char against perlite? Perlite is manufactured in a factory, synthetic, and you have to purchase it. Biochar can be made from any form of organic material in your backyard for relatively free. So this is a reason, and it doesn't deteriorate. So there's no replacing it. Once I've utilized it, I don't have to replace it, and it's better. So if that's the proponent of perlite, well, that's the person selling you perlite's description. We don't want to sell you biochar. I want you to make biochar for yourself. Yeah? Then you never have to make it again. So we want to look for how we can create systems. Mostly you make it yourself. You don't need to buy anything from me. And then at which time you don't have to keep spending money to grow food. You should be making money by growing food, not spending money to grow food. This other one is called rock wool. It's literally fiberglass compressed into a cube. Some people that make really nice names, they market them as grow cubes or oasis cubes. So it's a really nice name on it, oasis cube. Well, functionally it's fiberglass compressed. They put the seed, embed the seed into the fiberglass, and the fiberglass provides the root structure, and the nutrient-laden, non-organic growing solution flows by, and you grow a plant. Its nutritional value, who knows? Let's take a look at a little bit of the history of hydroponics. Hydroponics became popularized when a scientist named Dr. William F. Garrick experimented with plant nutrition on a commercial scale. In doing so, he named these nutrient culture systems hydroponics. We can see the book where this is derived from, The Complete Guide to Soilless Gardening. So what is the etymology of this? Well, in Greek, we have the word hydro, meaning water, and the word ponis, meaning labor, or water working. So water working is a great aspect of hydroponics, or hydroculture specifically. So to separate in a permaponics aspect, we're using hydroculture. We're using the working nature of water, but we haven't separated it from soil. And in a naturalized setting, we obviously can see the rain goes onto soil, creates growth. So if we can take a higher nutrient-laden soil, store it into reservoirs, for instance, that we have here at Raktamachat, because in our dry season, we have no access to water. It doesn't rain sometimes for 6 months in any fashion that would grow what we would know as vegetables. So we would not be able to produce vegetables for up to 8 months of a year. But if we're able to capture water in our ponds through our swales, diversion channels, and dams, so at this point we have access to that water. So with solar energy, you can pump water to your garden. But that being said, it's not cheap to create these systems. So we need to be conservative with our water usage. So when we look at permaponics and we're able to save 90% of the water through the application of containers, we're able to utilize less energy to pump the water to our gardens, and we're storing the nutrients better. So this is really where it all comes together. Starting here with the concept of making water work. Water is energy. And then moving forward into how to capture nutrients and alleviate work through ergonomic conditions. So hydroponics started to take off in the late 1920s and the early 1930s. Dr. Garrick focused his research on growing practical crops for large-scale commercial applications. So here we can see the advent of the birth of what we may know as factory vegetable farming. If we want to describe factory farming of animals, we now factory farm vegetables. But it didn't really take off because they really didn't have, the technology wasn't really there. It wasn't affordable. So they could make systems that would grow food in university settings, okay, research settings, and they could show that this worked. But it wasn't affordable, it wasn't practical. At a home scale, it just didn't work. So people weren't, it was interesting, but I can't do that at home, so what am I going to do? Well, so we'll still look for how that changed. So before that, let's look at what, though, in hydroponics is used if they don't have soil. So if no soil growing medium is present, what do they actually use for soil? Well, they describe it as anything inert, meaning non-living. They do not want to have organic materials. They want to have non-organic materials in a way. Now, everything conceptually is organic if it's a living thing, but rocks, things of this nature, are described as inert or non-organic. So they will use gravel, as we just saw, rock wool, which is a synthetic fiber, or fiberglass, if you will. Sand, lots of people grow in styrofoam. So the same thing that you may have as a styrofoam cup that we now don't utilize so much in our drinks anymore because people don't like that as an eco thing, but yet they're growing the food in styrofoam. And vermiculite, as I said, man-made rock. And all of these, when they have problems with soil diseases, algae, or anything of that nature, insect problems, they take out the growing medium and they throw it into the garbage typically. Almost all of these are at that instance, recyclable. So you have to have money in and you're filling up functionally some type of landfill. This is a reasoning for looking at an issue and then trying to say, how can we solve that issue? There's nothing wrong with hydroponics, but there is something wrong with filling up landfills full of styrofoam. So if we could utilize something better, that would still be great, right? So in this instance, we go back to, well, what if we just utilize making our own soil? It alleviates the problems and we don't have to throw it away. And worst case, if we wanted to change the soil in my Permaponics, you know where I would put it? In my garden. This is great, it's great soil. So I may want to work on my Permaponic system and I take that soil, put it in my garden, and then I'll put some new one in, that's fine. So it's not a waste product.